Hey friends, it's Mrs. Van and Rudy. We're going to read some more of our book, Guest by Mary Downing Hahn. We are on chapter 9, so let's find out what is going on with Molly and Guest. We slept badly that night, hiding ourselves as best we could under a ledge of rock. In the morning, we went on, our bodies stiff and weary, our bellies empty. The land around us was studded with boulders and tall rock formations, dull and gray. Not a village, not a farmhouse, not a man, woman, or child to be seen. No birds, no animals, not even a breeze to stir the air. Just Guest and me, alone in the darklands. Days and nights, nights and days, streamed past like leaves blown in the wind. I'd lost count of them long ago. It seemed as if we'd been walking for a week, a month, a year, 100 years. Like everything in this land, time moved to different laws. Nothing seemed fixed or certain. There were times when I was no longer sure of anything, not even Guest. I could not think who he was or why we were here and not at home with Mam and Daddo. Or if Mam and Daddo still existed, or had ever existed. After days or maybe weeks of walking, we stopped to rest by a stream. We'd been eating frogs and fish we caught in streams, berries, and sometimes a rabbit or a squirrel Guest managed to trap. Guest was so skinny I could count his ribs. We were tired and weak from hunger, but the stream's mossy bank was quiet and peaceful. Soon the sound of water running over stones lulled us both to sleep. I woke from a dream of home and almost wept to see the dark forest instead of sunlit fields. Guest was still sleeping, so I lay where I was, listening to the running water. Rest while you can, I told myself. Gradually, I became aware of another sound. At first, I thought it was the wind moving through the trees, but as I listened, I realized it was a baby's cry. I got to my feet to hear better. Yes, it was a baby lost in the forest and crying for help. Thomas, I whispered. Thomas, is it you? The baby cried louder. Leaving Guest asleep, I crept into the forest. If I woke him, he'd try to stop me. He'd say it was another trick. But I was certain Thomas had escaped somehow from the kind folk and was trying to find his way home. When I was far enough away to be sure of not waking Guest, I called softly, Thomas, where are you? It's me, Molly. I've come to take you home. The bushes rustled, and a baby crawled toward me. His blonde curls were tangled, and his rosy face was pale and dirty. But it was Thomas, laughing and stretching out his hands to me. I lifted him up in my arms and hugged him. Oh, Thomas, I've missed you so. He smiled and cooed and touched my face. Molly, Molly. You can say my name now, I whispered. Oh, Thomas, you remember me. Holding my brother safe in my arms, I told him about the long journey I'd taken to find him. I'll bring you to Guest, and then we'll start for home. Oh, you can't imagine how happy Mam and Daddo will be. And joyfully I carried my brother through the forest, looking for the place where I'd left Guest. Wouldn't he be surprised when he saw whom I'd found? Why, we could go home without ever meeting the kind folk. I didn't think I'd gone far, but I walked and walked without finding the stream. I passed the same tree twice before I realized I was going in circles. Like everything else in the Darklands, the path changed every time I left it, meandering this way and that. With every step I took, Thomas grew heavier. But how could I complain? It was my own sweet brother I carried, the baby I'd almost lost through my own foolishness, the baby I'd soon bring home to Mam and Daddo. But I was weak from hunger, tired and thirsty, and I was stumbling over stones and roots. I feared I'd fall with Thomas in my arms and hurt him. When I saw a mossy spot by a tall oak tree, I sank to the ground. Oh, Thomas, I whispered, I'm so weary. Let's sit and rest for a moment. Holding him on my lap, I sang a lullaby Mam used to sing. He leaned against me, his head heavy on my shoulder. Do you remember this song, Thomas? Mam sang it to you and to me as well. Soon we'll both be safe at home, and she'll sing it while she rocks you to sleep in your own cradle. I smiled down at him. He stared at me through half-closed eyes. He didn't smile. His face was different somehow, not as round as I'd thought, and not as sweet. Fearing he was ill, I hugged him and kissed the top of his head. Are you sick? Does something hurt? Have the kind folk treated you badly? Ma'am will make everything all right. She'll feed you and bathe you and love you. I didn't expect Thomas to answer my questions, but I was surprised by the low, angry sound he made. Almost like a growl it was. His body tensed and lost its softness. I held him tighter. Please don't be angry with me, Thomas. It's all my fault that they took you, and I'm heartily sorry I was so careless. I'll never let you out of my sight again. I promise. He struggled to escape, and when I tightened my hold on him, he snarled and sank his teeth into my arm. Shocked, I let him go. His lips drew back and exposed long, sharp teeth. Fur covered his body. What crouched in front of me was a wolf, not Thomas. I drew back in horror, but the wolf lunged at me and knocked me to the ground. He stood over me, teeth bared, and growled. I'd seen wolves before, but never like this one. From where I lay, he seemed the size of a horse. His teeth were the longest and sharpest I'd ever seen, and his eyes, they were cruel beyond belief. He meant to kill me, and I was too weak with fear to try to escape. He spoke to me in a rough and raspy voice. You will not see your brother. You will not rescue him. You will not take him home. He is lost to you and your parents. Please, please, I begged, have mercy. Thomas is ours. You stole him from us. You ask a wolf for mercy? He opened his mouth wide and grinned, showing me his teeth again. Thomas is ours, not yours. You should not have come to this land. I am here to see that you will never leave it. Using my heels to push against the earth, I tried to stand, but I was too weak. He grinned, and on his breath I smelled places not known to me. I could not imagine what he'd seen or what he'd done. What do you have to say, girl? Even if I'd had something to say, my mouth was too dry with fear to speak. But perhaps there was something else I could do. As he leaned over me, poised to attack, I pulled out the locket and pressed it as hard as I could against one of his eyes. With a savage howl, he leapt backwards, one eye gone, nothing left of it but a smoking hole and the stench of burned flesh. I had no idea which way to go, but I ran away from that wolf. Behind me, he continued to howl, but he didn't come after me. Maybe he was in too much pain. Maybe he was calling his brothers. All I knew to do was to keep running. When I couldn't take another step, I collapsed under a tree, and gripping the locket, I waited for my heart to slow. I gasped for breath. My side ached and my legs shook. The kind folk had tricked me again. They knew I'd not turned down a chance to rescue Thomas and carry him home to Ma'am. I looked at the bite mark on my arm. It had stopped bleeding, but blood stained my dress all the way down to its hem. Wearily, I got to my feet and began to search for the path again. Once more, voices called to me from the shadows. Once more, I stumbled and fell and wandered through bogs and heather, wolves howling somewhere behind me. When I'd all but given up, I stumbled onto the path and saw Guest running toward me, his skinny legs pumping hard. Where you been? I wake up and you was gone. Why did you leave? My dog said... I know what my dog said, but I heard Thomas crying and I went to find him. Picked him up, but I couldn't find the path. Then Thomas turned into a wolf. I put his eye out with the locket and ran away. I ran, and I ran, and I ran. He patted my arm to comfort me and saw the bite mark in the blood. Molly, you bleed. You hurt. The wolf bit me. I need to clean it. Guest led me to the stream, and I washed the bite as best I could. It began to bleed again, but I found a weed I'd seen Ma'am use for healing. I mashed the stem and smeared it on the wound. Then I tore off part of my skirt and washed the cloth in the stream. Guest tied it around my arm. We walked until night fell and camped in a cave by a stream. Guest caught a couple of fish, more bone than anything else, and after we ate them, we sat by the fire together, fearing every sound we heard. In the distance, a wolf howled, then another. I shivered and threw more wood on the fire. In the dark spaces between the trees, a twig snapped, and Guest drew closer to me. Something there. It's them again with a new trick. I stared into the dark, weary beyond weary. What would they do this time? Did I have the strength to face them again? Another twig snapped, nearer to us. I pulled the locket out of my dress and held it up so the silver caught the firelight. Who's there? Who wants to know? Brandishing the locket, I said, I want to know. A boy stepped into the firelight. His face was dirty, his hair a black tangle of knots and snarls, and his clothes were as faded and ragged as mine. You must be Molly. Who are you, and how do you know my name? Curling my fingers tightly around the locket, I dared him to come closer. And don't tell me any of your fine lies, for I know the ways of your people. You know nothing of me, nor the ways of my people. Indeed, I know more of you than you know of me. A simpleton you are, Molly Cloverall. Whoever this boy was, he had no right to speak so rudely. I don't know who's been spreading lies about me, but I'm no simpleton. This locket I hold, I've already been told about the locket. The silver hides the iron underneath. Don't threaten me with it. I studied him in the firelight. He wasn't more than a year or two older than myself, and not even an inch taller. Though he didn't look dangerous, I didn't trust him. Tell the truth, I said. Why are you here? Someone sent me with a message for you. Oh, no, I'll not fall for that trick again. I thrust the locket toward him. Go back to the kind folk and tell them Molly Cloverall has come to fetch her brother home. The boy stepped back and held out his hands, palms toward me, as if to fend me off. Keep that bauble away from me, he said. I'm not one of them, but my people have dealings with those ones from time to time. Cheats and thieves they are. Wicked, too. Bargains made and bargains broken. Truth told at midnight turns to lies before sunrise. A thought came to me. Maybe it was the way the boy spoke or the way he held his head. Who are you? Did Madog send you? I'm Aiden, Madog's son. He made me come. Madog never spoke of having a son. How do I know you're telling the truth? Aiden shrugged and spread his hands just as I'd seen Madog do. You'll have to take my word for it, won't you? Still suspicious, I eyed him closely. Sure enough, he looked like Madog. Why didn't Madog come himself? Oh, he has important business, Aiden said, and I, of course, have nothing to do except obey his orders, even when they are daft. I dropped the locket inside my dress. This boy was ill-natured, but not a threat. Truth to tell, I said, I wish Madog had come and left you at home. And so do I. Aiden dropped his bag and stretched. He looked at Guest, who had not said a word, but stood staring at Aiden. I've never seen one of his sort before, Aiden said. If they're all as ugly as he is, it's no wonder folks leave them to starve at crossroads. The boy had a vexing way about him, and I disliked him more with every word he spoke. Don't speak of him as if he can't understand what you say. Madog told me you brought the changeling with you all the way from Lower Hexham. You have some idea the kind folk will trade him for your brother. No, not anymore. What will you do with him, then? I looked at Guest. He'd gathered sticks and stones and was sorting them by size and shape. What was I going to do with him? I'd leave him here, Aiden said, and be glad to see the end of him. Guest had begun building a stone tower. He didn't speak or look up, but I knew he was listening. I can't just leave him in this awful place, I said. I guess I'll take him home with Thomas and me. Oh, your parents will love that. Maybe not right away, I said, but in the end they'll take him in. In the end? Aiden laughed. Not ever, I say. Guest looked at Aiden and began to speak in the language he and Madog shared. Aiden made a short reply in the same language. Guest whimpered and drew closer to me. In anger, I turned to Aiden and said, What did you say to him? Aiden folded his arms across his chest. Why should it matter to you? I couldn't say when or why, but I had begun to care about Guest. I couldn't bear to see Aiden treat him as if he had no feelings. You had no cause to be mean to him, I said. He was only being friendly. I told him the truth, that's all. I'll never be a friend to a changeling. Aiden spit on the ground at my feet. I hate the creatures. What has a changeling ever done to you? You just said you'd never seen one before. I have a mind to leave you here and go home to my mam's cottage. Well, why don't you? Guest and I have no need of you. You need this, I wager. Aiden opened his pack and dumped out cheese and bread and apples. It's from Madog, not me. You and the changeling can starve for all I care. My stomach was too empty to spurn the food, and instead of leaving, Aiden set about making a fire. I toasted the bread on a stick and melted the cheese on top. Aiden ate with us, but he cast a cloud over the meal. No one spoke. We simply filled our bellies. Gus sat close to me, and every now and then I caught him looking at Aiden, his face fearful. "Don't mind him," I whispered. "He's rude and dirty, but he's my dog's son. He can't be all bad." Gus looked at me with mournful eyes. "You won't leave me here?" "You heard what I told Aiden. You and Thomas will go home with me. I promise." "But them at your house want Thomas, not me. They won't let me stay. When Mam and Dad'll see how much you've changed, they'll be glad to keep you." Guest plainly doubted Mam and Dad'o would treat him kindly. Much as I hated to admit it, I wasn't so sure myself. Aiden spoke up from his side of the fire. "Go to sleep. We've a hard walk ahead of us." Guest fell asleep almost at once, but I watched Aiden through half-closed eyes. I believed he was watching me too. I didn't trust him, and he didn't trust me. If only my dog was sleeping on the other side of the fire, and Aiden was far away. The next day passed in the usual way. Perilous climbs up and down rocky hills, rain in our eyes, wind buffeting us, midges biting us. It was a weary business, and my legs burned with the effort to keep up with Aiden. Guest clung to my hand and slowed me down. Every now and then, Aiden stopped and waited for us, clearly impatient. A fierce wind gave voices to the trees around us. Tossing and swaying, limbs creaking and groaning, they seemed to say, "Turn back, leave this land, you don't belong here, you aren't wanted." With Aiden in the lead, I struggled up a steep hill, dragging Guest behind me. "Bad place," he muttered over and over again. "Hush, you're scaring me," I told him. He looked at me, shook his head, and said no more, but his lips moved, and I suspected he was still telling himself we were in a bad place. Near the top of the hill, I stopped behind Aiden. Above us, a ring of tall stones thrust up from the earth. Their tops vanished into a heavy mist, and in their center lay a massive slab of rock, like a stage or an altar. Strong magic hung heavy in the air. I breathed it in and felt it burn my lungs. It crawled across my skin and prickled my scalp. I wanted to run back down the hill, but fear rooted me to the earth. Guest squeezed my hand so hard I felt my bones shift. He breathed fast, his bony chest rising and falling as fast as baby birds. "I thought their home was miles away," Aiden said, "yet here it is. My dog should be with us. As he spoke, green flames raced across the ground toward us. My skin tingled and my hair crackled. Guest and Aiden glowed as if they were burning from within. The flames vanished as quickly as they'd come, and a terrible silence fell. It was as if the green light had swallowed up every sound, and nothing would ever be heard again. Not a bird, not a human voice. In that silence, a woman in a long green cape stepped into the center of the stone circle. Head thrown back, she stood with her arms lifted to the sky as if she were calling lightning down on all of us. She shone with a light so dazzling, I couldn't look at her. Aiden fell to his knees. Guest and I did the same. We all bowed our heads and waited for her to speak. "2 children and a changeling," the lady said at last. "How pitiful." She paused a moment. "Stand up. Come closer. Let me see the miserable creatures I've trapped in my circle." With fear and hesitation, I got slowly to my feet and pulled Guest up with me. He shook so hard he almost fell at the lady's feet. Pale-faced, Aiden stood a few feet away. He looked past the lady's shoulder into the gloom behind her. I did the same, thinking it must be the proper thing to do. Guest pressed his head against my side and didn't look at anything. He clutched my dress so tightly I feared he'd tear it. "Boy," she said to Aiden, "come to me." Aiden stumbled forward. "Your Majesty," he whispered, but before he spoke another word, the lady struck his face with her open hand. Aiden's head snapped back, and he raised an arm to protect himself from a second blow. "Do not speak to the Queen until she tells you to." Her voice was so calm I scarcely believed she'd just struck Aiden hard enough to make him stagger. "I know who you are and why you are here," she went on in that same level voice. "If I allow you to live, and I'm not yet certain I will, tell my dog not to send a boy when a man is needed. Tell him I am angry that he has helped your contemptible companions to come this far into my land. He cannot protect them from my wrath." She paused a moment. I felt, rather than saw the Queen direct her gaze from Aiden to Guest and me. "Impertinent, foolish girl," she said. "Do you truly believe I will return your brother?" Was I expected to answer the question, or would I, too, receive a slap? The air stirred before I felt the blow. Stumbling backwards, I almost knocked Guest down. He whimpered and held my skirt tightly. "Answer the Queen when she asks a question," she said sweetly. "Your Majesty." I looked directly at the Queen, but in the bright light shining from her, I couldn't make out her features. "My mother is wasting away with grief, and my father has left us. I have come a long way to beg you to be as kind as you are beautiful, and allow me to take Thomas home." The Queen laughed. "Such a pretty speech! How amusing you are!" Turning to the crowd gathered behind her, she said, "Bring the boy forth. Let him decide whether to go or stay." I could scarcely believe how easily I'd won. All smiles and laughter, Thomas would stretch out his arms to me. Once again I'd hold him and smell the sweet baby scent of him. I'd bring him home and see Mam smile. I took a deep breath and searched for my brother in the crowd behind the Queen. The kind folk nudged one another and hid laughter behind their hands. In the rear, hidden from sight, a child protested angrily. People stepped aside to clear space for a young kind one, a girl about my age. She dragged a boy 7 or 8 years of age behind her. His face was pale as if he seldom saw the sun, and he wore a blue velvet suit trimmed with lace and fastened with gold buttons. "Why have you brought me here?" he asked the girl. "Let me go now, or I'll give you a kick you won't soon forget." The girl stepped back, but she didn't release him. "It's the Queen's order," she told him. "You must stand still and answer a question." He saw the Queen then and smiled. "Of course, Your Majesty. I will do as you bid." Despite his blonde curls and pretty face, I disliked him on sight. He was ill-tempered and rude. "I present Prince Tiernark," the Queen said. "Curtsy to him, Molly." While the boy smiled scornfully, I bent my knees clumsily. "Where's Thomas? You said—" The Queen took the sulky boy's hand and smiled at me. "Why, Molly, my dear, do you not recognize your brother, the one you've come so far to find?" I looked at the boy. Although he resembled Thomas somewhat, he was a boy, not a baby. It was another kind folk trick, another lie. "You seem puzzled, dear," the Queen said. "Is this not your brother?" "Of course not. Thomas is a baby." The Queen laughed, and the others joined in, but the boy scowled. "I assure you, this is the brother you seek. Shame on you not to recognize him." "You're playing a trick on me." "Don't try my patience, Molly. If you do not believe this boy is your brother, leave my land and do not return." Still filled with doubt, I looked at the boy. His blonde curls, his blue eyes. Time ran differently here. Maybe it was indeed my brother standing before me. I hesitated. "Thomas, don't you remember me?" The boy drew himself up as straight and tall as he was able. "My name is Tiernark, not Thomas. I have no sister. Take my advice and leave our land." Bewildered, I said, "You are my brother. My mother is your mother, and my father is your father. Come home with me, and you'll see how much we love you." I stepped toward him, but he backed away as if I carried the plague. "This land is my home," he said. "I know no other land. I do not know you." Scorn frosted his eyes, and his voice was as cold as the Queen's. "Leave here at once, and tell me no more lies." Your home is on the farm with Mam and Daddo and me. Not here. These are not your people. They are—" I clapped my hand over her mouth to avoid saying the kind folk's true name. "They have cast a spell on you." The Queen swept toward me. The hem of her long silken gown hissed behind her. At last I saw her face. Skin as white as foam at the foot of a moonlit waterfall. Hair as dark as a cavern, so deep the sun never shines there. Eyes as green as priceless jewels, and features as delicate as if she'd been carved from ivory by a sculptor of rare skill. But behind that perfect face was something dark and inhuman. I backed away, not so much from fear as from caution. The people of this land were even more dangerous than I could have imagined, and this one, the Queen, standing before me, was the most dangerous of all. The Queen's lips curled upward at the corners, but it wasn't a smile I saw. "You'd best be on your way, dear Molly. Tiernark is happy to be with us." Her smile froze my skin. What a pity to come so far and return empty-handed. The queen turned to Guest with a sneer. Take this filthy toad with you, unless you wish to have him here to die in the forest, which would be for the best. As she spoke, I felt Guest's heart beat fast and hard against my side. I forced myself to meet her eyes, although it was all I could do not to turn away. I won't leave until you release my brother from the spell you've cast upon him. Then I'll take both him and Guest home with me and never bother you again. Aidan turned his head away as if he couldn't bear to see what would happen next. The queen simply shook her head. My, Molly, what a foolish child you are. Normally I'd ordered my guards to kill you for such impertinence, but come now, I'm curious. How else will you entertain me? Tell me, I've never met such a comical fool. My knees shook, and I held Guest's hand as tightly as he held mine. You may laugh, but I love my brother, and I will take him from you. Turning to Thomas, the queen said, What say you, Tiarnak? Thomas drew himself up proudly. This is my land, he said again. I will not go with her. The kind folk laughed and vanished into the dusk. The sky turned black and the wind rose into a roar. The tall stones seemed to grow even taller. They tilted and bowed and whirled around us as if they danced to the wind's music, creaking and groaning with every movement. Thomas, I cried. Thomas! But he was gone. Still holding Guest's hand, I fell with him into a dark, cold, silent place where nothing moved. And that is the end of chapter 9. It was a long one. So look forward to chapter 10 coming soon. Rudy was napping the whole time. See? He likes to listen to books and nap. You guys know that. I'll talk to you soon, my 5th grade friends. Take care.